I'm Peter John Ross, and I'm an independent filmmaker. My entire life, all I ever wanted to do was write music for movies. As a teenager in the 80s, I became enamored with Edward Van Halen. Eddie actually even did a couple soundtracks, including from 1983 or 4 called The Wildlife. I even got to meet Edward Van Halen in 1993. I remember reading old Guitar Player magazine interviews with Edward Van Halen in the 80s, and he told this great story about how Ted Nugent did a concert with Van Halen, and he was so jealous of Edward Van Halen's sound, he paid Eddie's guitar tech, his roadie, to use his guitar plugged into his pedals and his amps and play. And then he was furious because he didn't sound like Van Halen. So later that night, he confronted Eddie and said, "It's like, I did this. Why? What did you take away? What's not there? What's the secret to your sound?" And this was far from the first time people have said that to Eddie Van Halen. And he said, "I just added a little Jape." Well, what is Jape? And in this interview, he goes, "I got sick of people asking me this because it's nothing. I don't know what it is that makes me sound like me. It's just my fingers touching this guitar plugged into this stuff that makes me sound like that. It's me." So, but people kept thinking there's a hidden pedal, or he did something, like he played with the amplifier in some special way. And the reality was he didn't do anything. And he kept calling it Jape so that people would think there was something there that wasn't there because he couldn't explain it. So how does this relate to filmmaking? Filmmaking is a creative form of alchemy where you're combining this script and those words with this director, with this sound design, with this score, with these actors, with this producer, that set. It's an alchemy that even when you have the perfect formula, it's still got to cook and become something. And there are times where it seems like everything's perfect and then the movie still sucks. And I always use that term that Van Halen said. I always call it, there's Jape. No one can ever actually know what it is that makes that magic happen. Nobody can truly explain what happens when the perfect script hits that director, those actors, and everything comes together and it becomes a classic that resonates for decades. Here's my example of two very similar projects where one worked and one didn't. You have 2011's feature film Super 8 by J.J. Abrams, and then the Netflix series Stranger Things. Super 8 was set up for perfection. You have a phenomenal director, J.J. Abrams, really good cast, really good script. Steven Spielberg is a producer. It's based on his movies from the 80s with him as a producer to help that. Everything should have been perfect. But in the end, I did not care about anyone or anything in the movie. And I can't tell you what's wrong. I can kind of pretend it's this or that, but I don't know what happens. Like, this had all the ingredients, but something in the baking, that formula did not work like it should have. Just a couple years later, the Duffler brothers go to Netflix and pitch something very similar. Super 8, set in the 80s, small town in Ohio. All the elements are there. It's like they had everything you're supposed to have, but it just didn't work. I just didn't care. Then you have the Duffler brothers, just a couple years later, go to Netflix and say, "Hey, we got this thing set in a small town in Indiana, set in the 80s. So both movies got the time period right, the right cars, the right look, the right feel. But with Stranger Things, all I did was care about what these kids did and said. What happened to them was very important to me. I was even almost the exact age of the characters in the years they portrayed in the film and the show. I mean, I was a kid in the 80s. I grew up on these Spielberg movies. I should have loved both projects equally, and I just didn't. With Stranger Things, I cared. With Super 8, I didn't care. Film critics and people online can pontificate and claim they know why one failed and one didn't, but it's all guesswork. You're talking about the audience, this mysterious, all-encompassing thing that no one can possibly truly know why the collective audience of the world through history cared about one thing and didn't care about the other. At least not in this case. One of these is a streaming series with multiple hours, and the other one is just a 2-hour movie. And you might say that's not a fair comparison, but the thing is, I have genuinely, truly cared about things that happen in just a 2-hour movie, and I've watched 2 10-episode seasons and not cared about a streaming series, so time is not actually the thing we're talking about. It still comes down to the alchemy of filmmaking, of what happens when those words are put in the mouth of that cast, directed by that director, edited by that editor, played with the sound design, with the set design, the costumes, everything that goes into a movie contributes to that formula and the alchemy that makes the final project. I cannot definitively say why some movies touch our souls and others do not. And some films are just forgotten an hour after you've seen them. When there is a great film, all other filmmakers want to catch that same lightning in the bottle. Studios will hire that same director and even that actor and think that just by mixing and matching, they can recreate it as a pure formula, and that's never recaptured lightning in a bottle. It rarely works to just try to mix and match those things and recreate a formula like that. To me, it will forever be Edward Van Halen's Jape. It's that magic, that unknowable thing that just happens when all of the elements come together and coalesce into that perfect film. Whenever I'm making a film myself, I always feel like Mickey Mouse and the Sorcerer's Apprentice from Fantasia. That we're there and you're controlling things, and sometimes it gets out of your control. And I think that's the difference between a sorcerer's apprentice and the sorcerer. The filmmakers that do it more, the filmmakers that practice and make more films and reach audiences, they get better and better at that magic. So yes, I think you have control over the magic to an extent. I think that some filmmakers can learn and grow and help create that alchemy and are much better at making a more classic film. People like Christopher Nolan tends to have a great deal of control exerted over his films that helps that alchemy along. But even he has movies that are not always an absolute hit. Sometimes how an audience reacts is outside of the filmmaker's control. Everybody who's a filmmaker is also still a student. We're always somewhere on that path of learning how to manipulate and control the audience in the way we want. But there's always a level of Jape, that magic that just makes things work perfectly. And that, to me, is the difference between a film classic that resonates through 100 years of cinema and a film that you just kind of like that you saw once. I hope you enjoyed this little lesson, and I hope you liked what you heard. If you want to hear more, or if you have something you want to know, please let us know in the comments below.